With the FBI investigating everything from bank robberies to espionage, there are plenty of creepy cases on the Bureau's radar. We'd like to imagine that the most disturbing of these cases gets solved quite quickly by this national organization, but that isn't always the case. Number 5. As a general rule, the more famous a person is, the more attention a case gets, and more attention usually leads to a quicker resolution, even if it's not necessarily the answers the families want. This hasn't been the case with the disappearance of John Brisker. Brisker had made a name for himself on basketball courts around the US. He played in the ABA and NBA between 1969 and 1975, but was as well known for his talent as he was for being one of the most volatile players. In particular, he often found himself butting heads with his coach, Bill Russell. Towards the end of his career, he was only playing the odd game, and Russell confirmed in October of 1975 that Brisker wouldn't be on his team in the upcoming season. Brisker would never make it back to the NBA. Instead, he told friends he was getting in touch with his roots. He'd always had an interest in Africa and African culture, and decided to use his time away from basketball to travel to the continent. In 1976 or 77, he visited a former teammate in New York, telling him all about his recent trip to Africa. His friend didn't think Brisker was in the right headspace, and actually tried to take his passport to stop him from going back. According to the friend, it seemed like Brisker was involved in something shady, and he still held a lot of anger towards his coach. It was all the ingredients needed for disaster, but Brisker didn't listen to his friend. In 1978, Brisker left everything behind to travel to Uganda, where he had plans to start an import-export business. He hadn't been in touch with his brother for a few years at this point, and had divorced from his wife. He kept in contact with his girlfriend in Seattle, but that stopped in April of 1978. What happened after that has been the subject of years of rumors. Some claim that he was close to the Ugandan dictator and lost his life at some point due to a government cover-up. Others say he was on the run from the law or from the mob. The FBI looked into some of these rumors, particularly whether he had any connection to the Ugandan dictator, but they were unable to confirm any of the theories. Brisker was legally declared dead in 1985, but many, even the medical examiner's office, don't consider this to be fact. Number 4. Rae Elaine was 19 years old when she vanished shortly after midnight on October 15, 1986. She had a 2-month-old daughter at home and was a well-loved member of the Menominee tribe. She was last seen at a birthday party she was attending with 5 friends. Nobody at the party could explain where she had gone or what had happened. 6 months later, she was found dead in a remote area of the reservation. The cause of death could not be determined, but police believe someone had taken her life. 35 years later, no arrests have been made, and police are still appealing for information. Crimes against Native American women and girls often go unsolved, and Rae Elaine's disappearance and death is one of the many cases of missing and murdered Indigenous women being looked into by the FBI. Rae Elaine went with a group of friends to a party not far from her home on the Menominee Indian Reservation. Nobody at the party reported anything unusual. Not long after midnight, she asked for a lift home, and an unnamed individual obliged and drove her to her home, but when they arrived, she didn't want to go inside. Instead, they drove around for a while and returned a little bit later. The exact timings are unknown, as is the state Rae Elaine was in when she returned. However, she didn't stay long and was last seen in a car with 2 people. When Rae Elaine didn't return home the next day, her family reported her missing. At first, police didn't treat the disappearance as suspicious. Rae Elaine was an adult and they believed it was possible she just spent the night with friends. However, her family was very close and they didn't believe she would abandon her daughter or leave them without warning. Eventually, police took the disappearance seriously, and investigators even recruited a psychic to help search for Rae Elaine and figure out what happened. Police spoke with other partygoers and found a number of leads and persons of interest. However, no suspect was ever named due to a lack of evidence. 6 months after the party, Rae Elaine's body was found in a beaver dam in a remote part of the reservation. More than 30 years later, no progress has been made. The FBI and the Menominee tribe offered a $20,000 reward for information in 2019, in the hopes that someone knows something and they might have the confidence now to come forward. Number 3. It's not only national matters that the FBI investigates. When US citizens disappear abroad, the Bureau often gets involved, especially if the citizens disappear in a particularly dangerous area. Paul Edwin Overby Jr. is one of the many kidnapping victims the FBI is searching for. He was 71 years old when he vanished in May of 2014 while researching his next book. Paul had a specific interest in the Middle East. He was born in Massachusetts, but in 1988, he fought with Afghan groups against the Soviet Army in the Soviet-Afghan War. He later wrote a book about the war and traveled to the country a total of 8 times when he disappeared during his last visit. The Soviet-Afghan War would not be the last time a foreign power put boots on the ground in Afghanistan, and he was very much against the US invasion of the country and the ongoing war there. He believed the best way to convince militant groups the US meant no harm was to pull the people out. In 2014, he traveled back to Afghanistan, and the goal was telling the story of the ongoing conflict there from both sides. Researching his previous book and the role he played in the fight against the Soviets had put him in contact with local leaders, many of whom were now working against the US. In May of that year, Paul made plans to travel to a remote area of the Afghan-Pakistan border. He had previously tried to get a visa to make the journey, but it had been denied. Now he had the chance to meet with the leader of a group that was opposing the US. The man was the son of the leader of a group Paul had fought with in the 1980s. It was an incredibly dangerous trip, but a once-in-a-lifetime chance to see the ongoing events from this point of view. On May 16th, Paul spoke to his wife on the phone. He told her he would be back within just a few days, and if he wasn't, something terrible had happened to him. Sure enough, Paul didn't get back in touch with his wife, and she feared the worst. So far, no group has come forward to claim the kidnapping, and Paul has not been used in any propaganda videos, as have some others. Now in his late 70s, Paul has a number of health conditions that need regular medication, and his wife fears the worst. The FBI and Rewards for Justice system have offered millions of dollars in exchange for information leading to Paul's release. Number 2. Danita Wilkinson has been missing since June of 2020, leaving behind 6 children that don't know where their mother is. Danita was in fear of her life in the weeks leading up to the disappearance, telling family members she was worried about 2 men who already had criminal records for domestic violence. She was last seen on CCTV leaving a motel on the morning of June 21st, then getting into a vehicle with tinted windows. Danita and her youngest children were staying with her brother in Evansville, Indiana. It was relatively early in the morning on June 21st, Father's Day, that she left the house. She told her brother she would be back soon, but didn't give him any information about where she was going. A few hours later, her teenage daughters tried to get a hold of her on her cell phone, only to get no reply. This sent alarm bells ringing for Danita's family. She would never ignore her daughters like this, and they knew something was wrong. The family continued to try to get a hold of her, but by 9 a.m. the following day, Danita's phone had been shut off and there was no sign of her. At this point, the family contacted police, who are still investigating the disappearance. Danita had previously told her family she was in fear of her life, naming 2 men who she thought would try to hurt her if they got the chance. Neither has been named publicly, though some information from their arrest records was reported. The worry Danita had before her disappearance has now left her family worried that she's in danger or worse. For a long time, police told the public Danita was last seen leaving her brother's house, only for it to be revealed earlier this year that there had been another sighting of her later that day. CCTV at an Evansville motel showed Danita getting into a silver Chevrolet Suburban. The driver never got out of the car, so there was a lack of images of them. The car was tracked down to southwestern Indiana and into southern Illinois, but where it is now is unknown. Police were able to track the owner of the vehicle, but he's been less than helpful. There are still loads of unanswered questions surrounding Danita's case, not least of all why it took police and FBI so long to release information about the car she was last seen in. Number 1. Panic swept through much of the northern United States in the fall of 1982 when 7 people from 5 households died after taking a common over-the-counter medication. Tylenol was and still is used by millions of people around the world to relieve pain and fever symptoms. It was one of the most popular brands in the US when massive recalls were ordered. Someone had injected cyanide into capsules from various batches of the drug, which were then sold in pharmacies across Chicago. There appeared to be no pattern, no obvious culprit or motive. It could have been a random madman, a disgruntled employee, or even a kid's wildly miscalculated prank. Even the possibility that a specific person was being targeted was put forward, and the other deaths were just collateral damage. None of these questions were ever answered. The deaths began on September 28, 1982, when 4 people from 2 separate addresses died. This involved a man named Adam Janus, his brother, and his sister-in-law. Adam fell ill first and died in the hospital. His brother Stanley and Stanley's wife Teresa were fine at the time, but after Adam passed away, they both returned to his home with the rest of the family and took medication from the same Tylenol bottle Adam had. Not long after, they were admitted to the same hospital Adam had, and both later passed away. At this point, a doctor at the hospital was able to determine they'd all suffered cyanide poisoning. Firefighters who had been involved in the earlier call mentioned that the fourth victim had also taken Tylenol extra-strength capsules shortly before her death. Finally, the poison was traced back to the tablets, and an emergency recall was announced, but it wasn't quick enough to stop 3 other people from consuming tainted medication. There didn't appear to be any clear connection between the victims. They didn't share the same jobs, shop at the same stores, and even batch numbers on the Tylenol bottles were different. Finding out who contaminated the capsules and why became a multi-organization investigation, and the FBI got involved. It was confirmed that the capsules had been tainted on purpose, and the cyanide had been added after the medication left the factory where it was made. Investigators looked into angry employees who might have wanted to ruin the reputation of Tylenol's owners, but no arrests were made. There was little progress in the investigation until later that October. Tylenol owners Johnson & Johnson received a letter demanding $1 million for the killings to stop. The writer asked for the money to be deposited into a bank account in Chicago. The person who wrote the letter was sloppy enough for investigators to be able to trace it back to an accountant named James Lewis. Lewis and his wife were in New York at the time of the attacks, and it was determined he had no involvement in the actual crime. He'd written the letter to try to make the owner of the travel agency look bad, and was later imprisoned for extortion. To this day, there have been no other arrests made, or even persons of interest confirmed, but the incident did lead to packaging reforms that made tampering with medication nearly impossible. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you like this video, be sure to click that like button. Also, don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell to keep up to date with all of our future uploads. But I've been Ty Knotts, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.